I'm going to try to turn things over to Neha Mann. Neha is a graduate of the DAP program and was the outstanding DAP student in 2020. Great accomplishment. And Sebra Debrecht. Sebra is an artist and a designer. And I'm going to let them tell a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to jump into the presentation.
Okay, great. I'm actually gonna, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. There was just suddenly so much silence. So I'm gonna actually share the presentation. The first slide is our introduction. So let's do that. Here we are.
Yeah, so here's Neha and myself and our beautiful line drawings. But I'm Sebra, and as Mark was saying earlier, I'm an artist. I just recently graduated from DAP with my Master's of Fine Art, and I'm still a student at DAP actually, and I'll be continuing my design degree next year and finishing that up. So I will have a Master's of Fine Art and a Master's of Design in 2021, hopefully. My area of interest in art and design really lies within sustainable environmental development and system solutions, looking really at more of like the local and personal habit changes to kind of make a better world and environment for ourselves. And I'll hand over to Neha.
I'm Neha. I'm Neha Mann. I'm a Master's of Design student as well from UC. That's how Sebra and I know each other. I'm from India and I've previously worked as a design researcher, and my primary areas of interest are pretty much in women's health and advocacy. And more recently, I've been applying my design research and visual skills to UX design.
So, as you know, we're all here to talk about our understanding and use of discovery research in building customer experience, and why we believe it's the most important component in Agile cycles for a really sustainable and user-centered experience. Throughout this presentation, Neha and I will be sharing with you some of our personal projects for Total, and looking at the tools and methodologies that we chose to use to kind of produce the generative research to support our customer-centered outcomes. So just to define what discovery is for us, and to put it simply, is that it's really just understanding your user and the problem that's at hand. So if you're missing either of these, you're really kind of just building in the unknown, solving for a problem that maybe doesn't really exist, or you're looking at an audience that might not be the target audience that you're wanting to solve for. And so in this, you might be wasting a lot of time, money, and your efforts in the long run. So for us, discovery should really start, go back, Neha.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So discovery should start with really a broad objective, such as, going to find out what the problem is, how big it is, and what the opportunities might be. And so in the end, you should have an understanding of your users, the problem that should be solved, the opportunities, as well as a shared vision with your team. So, all right.
Okay.
And so we know when starting research, there are many methods and tools to choose from, and it becomes really complicated when to know when to narrow them down and when to use them. So from our experience coming from academia, we were really taught kind of a broad perspective of design, strategy, issues, theory, trend forecasting, etc. But from our understanding, really, all of this is really just leading you to, frame your audience and to help you understand your user, or AKA, what we learned basically is that we as designers are the voice of the user. And so we really have the power to create and solve for the problems that our customers are facing when using our products and our systems. And therefore, their input and their voice is the most important and most relevant information for anything we decide to build. And so neglecting or reducing our discovery time is not only a major loss to us, but also to our users and our customers.
After having learned this in academia, the summary that Sebra gave, that we had this understanding of everything that we were taught was about the user. But as soon as you step into the industry and actually work on an industry project, this is what a build cycle or an agile cycle really looks like. So there is a short discovery phase in the beginning, and then you get into these iterative cycles because your timelines are crunched, and the role of discovery starts to become more and more restricted in the agile process. So in this traditional cycle, The discovery phase is in the beginning, and then we have a build phase. We get feedback on it, build feedback. We do that repeatedly. Even within those sprints, we have multiple feedback cycles. But usually, these cycles, especially like while working in the industry, these cycles are pretty much internal because not everybody has constant access to the user repeatedly to go out and like get feedback on it. So the product keeps going in cycles, and by the end, by the time it's released, it becomes so much more product centered than user centered. So we are here to make the case about actually building user-centered products and how we do that. And we want to say that a simple change in your timeline by increasing your discovery and eventually reducing the number of sprints you do in building your product can be a better way to start. So really building that foundation through a heavy discovery phase can maybe guide you better so you don't have to go through so many cycles of iteration. So even within the discovery cycle, there are double diamonds. So you learn something about the user, then you articulate it, you synthesize it through design methods, then you learn something else, and then you synthesize it. So this really, each diamond tells you what needs to come in the next learn phase. So here is where we're trying to say we want to step into answering these questions: that what do you learn, how do you synthesize it, why should you learn it? Okay, does anyone have any questions so far? Because we're going to get into showing our examples, but if anyone has any questions so far, we can address those.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce how important discovery is. I think going back 10, 15, 20 years ago, I was trying to figure out how to do technology projects. And there were no precursors to kind of like submitting your requirements, and just the developers would just start coding.
Mm-hmm.
And, we really kind of had to do a timeout and say, there's got to be a number of stages of vetting. First is discovery, and then kind of a feasibility stage where is it what we think we research doable? And, once you then even have that stage done, is it a priority? Should we work on it now? Is it urgent? Or amongst the other projects, should something come before it? Or how do these things knit together? Because many times these technology initiatives are interdependent in some way or fashion. So when I heard their interest in doing this topic, I was like, this is really cool because I don't see enough discovery done in most projects. So thank you.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think something we had discussed, Sebra and I had discussed at the back end, was that this is so relevant to us right now because I think definitely if you're starting a new project, if you're starting a new product, this is really relevant to do your discovery. But at this point, even if you have a really sophisticated product at hand that you've built, but your user has suddenly changed in the last 3 months. So it's all the more important to go back and really understand those user needs again. And I think we have a completely like new consumer insight now. So really this phase, understanding them in real depth can be valuable to the entire world right now because we have a new consumer. So I just wanted to say that now that we've seen, like we've made our little case for why we think discovery is important and why we should make it longer, we wanted to share a little bit from our background how we have used discovery and how it really helped us pivot or really shape our products. So we're going to share 4 different examples of 4 different projects which had different constraints. Some didn't have very clear briefs, some had very clear briefs. So like how do you really choose how to do discovery and what you need where? So the first project is by Sebra.
Yeah, so Cincinnati Made was a local project that I was working on probably about a year ago now. And basically, Cincinnati Made is a nonprofit organization focused on bringing local makers together to create a community and help them build their businesses wherever they needed help, essentially. And so, unfortunately, that idea and this organization was a little bit short-lived. And so they came to us to look to figure out why member activity was down due to multiple factors, our time frame was limited. We knew that our members were kind of all over the place and they were scattered. We only really had access to them possibly online and possibly in interviews, like one-on-one interviews. And in the beginning, our brief, we were given a really thorough survey that the Cincinnati Made had conducted, but it wasn't too much information beyond that. So Neha, if you could go forward one. So as I mentioned before, our first objective was to really figure out what the problem was here and with their core members in the activity. But to do that, we really needed to narrow down which users we needed to focus on first. And Cincinnati Made had a very broad scope of members. So even though we had a really limited time frame, the team decided to continue into our own discovery phase. We really did this because we believe that even though the survey was thorough, we ourselves needed to do our own kind of research and talk to the users one-on-one to figure out what their unique needs were. And so the methods that we decided to go with was the online survey and also any short interviews that we could conduct in our time constraints, as well as really heavily relying on our own personal observations, our desk research, essentially looking at other local maker communities that were outside of Cincinnati in other cities to really just benchmark what they were offering to their members and what we could bring forward to, Cincinnati Made's product. So we conducted, after the surveys and the interviews, we kind of put together this user landscape map, and we were able to plot all of our users to the clients' available offerings that they had at the time. So then we were able to narrow down and pick a demographic that we wanted to focus on and which needed most attention and reboot that member activity. And so really without this longer discovery phase, we wouldn't have learned that the local makers, which we were going to focus on of this organization, was the core, and they felt that they weren't unified still, and that they were still without the resources that Cincinnati Made had projected to offer them in the original idea of it all. And so the longer discovery phase was really impertinent to this project because we needed to focus down to the single demographic again, and we're able to do this and frame out easily what the core problem was and ideate to solve for that inactivity gap within them. And so this might not have happened and might have been missed if we had not taken the time to follow up with our users' unique needs in this project.
Mm-hmm. And you were able to do this even when your access to the users was very, very scattered and kind of, if someone agrees to talk to us, it was, right?
Yeah, so we really only had like 4 interviews. Unfortunately, we had very limited access to our users, but people were really amazing and were willing to talk to us. And that we really kind of like settled on like what we needed to do and the problem solved from there, even though it was very small.
Okay, so cool. So actually quite the polar opposite of this was a project that I worked on, because we had lots of time, we had lots of access to users, and we were given quite a bit of information beforehand. So this, I think, I don't know if anyone knows Pyatt Park in Cincinnati, which is by the public library in downtown. So some people know it as Garfield Park. So this project was with the Cincinnati Police Department, and they were struggling with how this area in downtown was becoming the most crime-prone area in the whole city. It became a really popular site for homeless people to live in, as well as drink and smoke, and for drug exchange and drug abuse. So they had already the 2 officers that we met had already done a lot for this place as well as for the library. So this park was in fact chosen because it was next to the library, which had bathrooms and access to water and electricity and air conditioning. So that's why this whole area was slowly growing in crime. So the police department came to us. This was me and 7 other students. This was part of a course at UC. So they came to us and they said, well, we've tried a lot of things. We have changed the lighting. We have changed the stalls in the bathroom so people don't overdose. We have put brighter lights in the park. We have done a lot, but this has just become a hotspot and we're not able to change this. We need to shake this up. How do we do that? And this time we wanted to do something which was not very it was not architectural. We were not going to say that, okay, you should remove your benches or you should have benches where people can't sleep. So we didn't want to go to the direction of hostile architecture. We wanted it to be something very low tech, just smart. So I'm not going to get into the details of what we made, but a snippet of what you see here is so the product, one of the solutions that we suggested was called Chirp, which was a reporting app where the residents could actually report activities in the park, but instead of going to the police, it would play a message in the park. And those messages were obviously very finely crafted that some were targeted towards educating people, some were targeted at talking about resources that 10 steps from here, not 10 steps, well, 10 minutes from here is a homeless shelter where you could find a home and you could find food. So that is what we suggested, and the police was very excited about it. Parts of our suggestions are actually being implemented. So since this was a public park project, we had all the access in the world to talk to the people. We could stay in the park. So what we wanted to really learn, it's also like the police had told us that we know we've been working on this for a while. We know that these are the bad guys, these are the good guys. So we have these teenagers who are really troublemakers. We have, I'm not going to get into the details, but there's gambling, there's lots of problems in the park. So they had already given us quite a bit like top level personas, but we wanted to understand really who is this affecting, because they gave us some idea, but we wanted to know by ourselves. So the methods that we took here were ethnography and semi-structured interviews. So I understand ethnography is in sociology a much longer process, but I think ethnology when applied to design is kind of ethnography when applied to design could be immersing yourself in the experience, re-socializing in the park, and just kind of walking in the shoes of the user of the park. So just being a park user, talking to people. We conducted semi-structured interviews for half an hour with multiple users, and in my opinion, this method was best used when obviously we had direct access and when there are multiple players. So you go and you don't have a bias yet. So you go in, you talk to everyone, and that starts to tell you what the personas are. So to synthesize the learnings from these interviews, we did make personas. We made 5 personas, but I wanted to share a regular Rob. I think he's a very interesting persona, which is a bit different from what the police had told us. So, what is really interesting about regular Rob is that he really fits the bill of what the police had told us about the troublemaker. The police had said that this guy is homeless. Well, he is. That he is drinking alcohol and probably smoking, which is not allowed. He is. But when you actually talk to regular Robs in the park, you start to see that they're much more dimensional and there's so much more to them. So just if you just read the large quote, it says it's my city and I've lived in downtown for 9 years. So if I want to sit down and drink quietly, I should be able to do that. So technically he's not wrong there. Of course he's wrong to break the rules, but this is just a guy who feels ownership of the city because he's always lived there and is probably having a bad time right now in life. So to get that really to empathize with him, these personas are really helpful. We also understood that he is actually one of the people who is looking for a purpose, who has rehabilitated from his bad habits and is trying to now, he's very motivated to actually volunteer to improve the park. So this has turned out to be an actual persona that we can engage in the interventions that we suggest. So just the example of this persona, I think, is a good example to share that overall how just talking to the users in detail about kind of nothing in particular. Our interviews were semi-structured, so just letting them talk really gave us a very holistic understanding of what is going on in the park, why is it going on. And when we started, our objective was pretty much that well, we know there are troublemakers. How do we take them out? Well, not in a hostile way, but still the objective was we know these are troublemakers, they need to move out. But when we did this persona mapping, we could understand that everybody wants to just enjoy the park. And we need to change our objective to understand that it's not about taking anyone out, it's about respecting everyone's space. It is a public park. It's just about removing the negative behavior enablers. And so that really helped us pivot and change the direction of the entire project. Yeah, I think this was really important as an empathy building exercise. So that's how we used discovery in this.
Yeah, I just figured we could stop here and ask if anybody else had any questions at this point about either of these projects that we could answer for you before moving on to 2 more examples.
That's right.
I just had a question about this example that you're talking about now. Were you able to share any of this back with the police officers who you originally worked with, and what was their reaction to this?
Right. So we did share, we phased this out into like 4 phases, and at 4 phases we were able to share it with the police. 2 of these phases we were even able to share it with the Cincinnati Parks Department and multiple residents, 3 CDC, so all the stakeholders who take decisions around parks. So we had overall 3 large like systemic solutions. The Chirp app was one of them, and so actually the Chirp app is the one that is currently not being implemented because it's the most it's the highest investment. But otherwise we had some interactive signage, as well as we had engagement zones in the park. So those are actually being implemented right now. Yep, that's that.
Awesome. Yeah, this is great work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great work. I think these are classic UX type activities. You look at the persona development, the empathy map. These are ideal scenarios where you're getting back to the user one-on-one and able to formulate a better solution when you have input. Here with regular Robert, he's obviously not a troublemaker, and you realize you're dealing with a slightly different personality than you think you might be if you've got trouble in the park. So this is great, very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the first 2 projects that we shared, we still had access to users, and then I think in at least one of our projects, we share what do you do when you just don't have access? How do you do discovery then? So let's look at Sebra's project for now. Yep.
Yeah, so this next project, my team and I, which were a couple other students, were looking at one of the global goals for sustainable development, really focusing on clean water and sanitation, which is really just basically looking at how to solve for the issue of diminishing freshwater resources and basins at the global and local level. And so luckily for us and this project, we had a lot of time. We had about 6 weeks to go forward with this, but unluckily, we were given no information at the very beginning of this project. We were just kind of put forward with this problem and looking at it at a global perspective in the very beginning. And so I would say half of the time that we spent on this project, it was dedicated to discovery, where we were really looking at the issue from a really broad perspective and, really just looking at how to set up, from our desk research at the broad perspective, how to frame that down to really kind of narrow this issue for ourselves. And so we decided to define how we wanted to approach the issue, which was at a local level and really looking at the demographic of Generation Z. And we were lucky to have the openness to do that for ourselves. We weren't really constrained to talking with a client about this. It was more of like a personal project for our student work. And so once we were able to focus down our parameters, we did have a lot of access to users via remote or in person. And again, we weren't given too much information, unfortunately, at the very beginning. But to move forward, our biggest question was, how does the water crisis affect the Generation Z at the local Cincinnati level, essentially? We really needed to understand how or if the water crisis did affect Cincinnatians. And looking at kind of their everyday life with their understanding of water, essentially. And so our methods to getting to know this information was including the use of journey maps in our interviews. And from there, we were able to really plot out our users' day in the life and what they did, and every time they touched water throughout their day, and kind of understanding how much water was being used at certain points in the day and times, and maybe where there were hiccups and or areas that we could solve for in that timeline. So
Next.
yes. So to synthesize this information through our interviews, we were able to gather our users' stories. We were to put together about 3 personas based on the interviews, and we built out 3 different user types. 2 are here. Really kind of telling us the different needs and the stories that these users had in regards to their relationship with water in their everyday. This really allowed us to identify the gaps with each of these personas had. And from there, we could go forth with ideating a product or system solution for them. And so this discovery was really important for us to really, navigate the landscape of our user and understand like the very specific customer of the Gen Z and their behaviors and connections with water that eventually led us to solve for their unique needs. Excuse me. Through our solution, which ended up being more of like an app solution, kind of, like if you were tracking your everyday exercise, you're more like tracking your water habits. And the app would tell you where you could, better use your water throughout the day so you could save water from a local level to hopefully impact the global water crisis as a whole. So there's that project for you.
Would you say, Sebra, this project was pretty upstream where you didn't really have, it wasn't like, okay, by this time we have to start building something and we have to have a product at hand. It was pretty much, we have a problem. How do we go about solving this?
Yeah, it was more about we were faced with a problem. Of course, we built ourselves a timeline to get it finished in the 6 weeks, but it was really open to kind of where we wanted to go with it, where we wanted to take it, who we wanted to look at. And so the discovery was really important in that aspect, that we could learn from like the broad scale. And then from there, with information we got, we could funnel it down and to look at more specific local demographic, essentially, to navigate the problem from there.
So this is one of my projects with Cincinnati Children's Hospital. It's called COPE, and it's essentially the end product. There are many, but what I'm sharing here today is pretty much this. It's a monitoring app which helps you cope with this disease called sickle cell disease. I'm not going to go into details about it, but sickle cell disease is a rare disease, so there isn't a lot of information that exists on it. One of the cons of or like one of the really tough things to make a decision on treatments for sickle cell disease is that there isn't a lot of research to rely on. So the patients of this and anyone affected by this disease really relies on the community and what the community has to say, and it based on advocacy by people who are affected by it. So Children's Hospital told me a very broad thing that, okay, there is a medicine called hydroxyurea. This can benefit patients of sickle cell disease, but it's not a medicine made by children's or anything. It's just a FDA approved drug for SCD. So at this point, it is also known that hydroxyurea also has a lot of side effects. So we wanted to make a strategy that, okay, we have this new information. We need to make a strategy how, or a system of how do we educate the different stakeholders about taking the best decision for their child. So the stakeholders could be a parent, a patient themselves. Sickle cell disease usually occurs in children. It's inherited as well, but it continues. So it could be caregivers, it could be people in the community who are advocating for sickle cell disease. So we had a lot of time. In fact, this project is still going on. Sebra is actually taking over now as the designer. And so we had a lot of time. We still have time. We have Usually the team looks like one designer and a developer. Pretty much that's it. And we have constant input from the doctor side because we work for the hospital, but we don't have so much access to the user. It's pretty much you make something and at the very end you can get a buy-in. So it's, you could say this is the traditional agile cycle where you're just when you release it at the end you can get some feedback and then you can create a new version if required. And as I said, we were given some part. I was given some information. I was given information about how there are these 4 or 5 players in this system, but I had to make sense of what they need and who they really are. So my learn phase was really focused on, okay, what should we be building? That now we have all these. We have a top level understanding of all these different stakeholders. What should we build? Why should we build it? Do we even need an app? Like, those are the questions that were being asked for this project. So for this, I couldn't rely on any of the methods that we just shared or any of the other like standard classic methods that always work. So I wanted to make a custom framework, which is the image on the right. So what I was given was pretty much what you see in the goals column. So for different kinds of users, we had the goals. So like we were told that the it was as broad as the patients need to know everything possible about the disease, and hydroxyurea. So I really started to break that down. So maybe they need resources about, they need to know the benefits and side effects. So I broke down every goal there and started writing what the messaging with that will be. So, so we want it to look like, okay, the final decision is yours. How do we do that? They need some study material, but it also needs to be dynamic, that they can interact with it and they can input something. So it's really a shared decision. And then we came to, okay, we probably need an app for this one, for this user, for this goal. So I think this exercise really helped us to understand that for the product directions to be really inspired by what the goals of the users are, because we had really broken that down. And going in this sequence, you can see that like the media is really coming from what the user has asked for. So to synthesize the learnings from the framework, I made a little like ecosystem map to try to understand, okay, we have decided to make these 6 products. Where do they fall, and who is going to use which product? So for example, one of them was, we're just going to make bookmarks which are going to have information that the doctor, standard information, as well as something that the doctor can write, and that goes in the envelope that you take after your consultation. Something as simple as that. So you use it kind of rarely, and you're just receiving information. So this is pretty much for the patient or the caregiver. But on the very other end of the spectrum is Cope, the app that I was talking about, which is a monitoring phone app, which it can monitor your fatigue levels every day, your pain level every day, and start to bring insight into your own experience through the disease. So and everybody has a different experience. So this is that thing which it falls on the use every day. So you use this daily to really start, and you input information. So you really start to understand how this disease is affecting you and how you would like to cope with it. It also has a very strong community component in it, because, like I said, this disease is very is reliant on the information from the community. So this app, along with a dashboard which the doctor can access, really works both ways, because now the user is able to understand themselves, but it also is feeding data into the missing pool of, like, the larger missing pool of data or around sickle cell disease. So when the doctors can access it, this helps the community at a larger scale as well. So that is what this was. So yeah, with this exercise, it really, with the discovery process, making our own custom framework, it really helped us understand that there are multiple build directions and what they are. And then if we are making a certain product, what should we make? Why should we make it? and then we really let the user needs guide product development instead of the other way around, that we want to make an app. So here's yeah, that's what we did with children's. So we'll just, Sebra, do you think we'll just end and ask questions?
Yeah, we got like 2 more slides.
Yep. So yeah, I think in summary, we just wanted to show our 4 projects together, and we wanted to say that with different levels of access, you can still perform unique methods of discovery. And it would probably be a good idea to go first to see what results you want. So, okay, I want empathy. I want to build empathy with my users. I know them, I know what they do, but I don't know who they really are, why they do that. So, really backtracking from there, and then you can see what kind of methods you want, what that learn, the divergent learn diamond would be. So, you can really start getting into that.
And so to finalize everything, we believe that slower discovery equals better user-centered products. And so from our understanding and our experience, when we slow down the discovery process, we're able to more fully understand our customers and their needs within that problem, and more accurately identify the core of those problems that we need to solve for to produce really sustainable products or systems that at their core are user or customer centered. So we thank you, and that's all we have for you today. So we'll open it up for questions from here.
Yeah, we would love to answer questions.
Yes, great job. You guys really reinforce the value of discovery. Help me understand better perhaps how you intervene at stages in the Agile cycle where you bring new information back that says, okay, we started down the road and we had it somewhat right, but we've learned more information, and where we're building and what we're doing is not exactly on target. We have new information. And then how do you inject that back into the build process to be sure that you take a left or a right at the Y in the road?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
go for it.
Do you want me to? Yeah. I think off the top of my head, just that definitely steps into evaluative research. So once you have something at hand, and that's kind of how we did it. Well, I did it with children's, and it was pretty much that we had made quick mock-ups, quick prototypes, and we took those out. So that does get into evaluative research, but I think, yeah, once you study that, I personally have not had the experience of wanting to interview again, wanting to develop personas again. But I think if your personas, this would arise when your personas or anything that you've synthesized in the beginning is not really strong enough. And that can happen so easily with our biases, with what we think we know, and it can happen so easily. So that, I think, is the only case where you would have to really interject and say, okay, you know what, we've been making for this persona and this is not working out, this persona is not right, let's go back to the drawing board about that. So I think that's where I see that happening. Sebra, what do you think?
Yeah, I just think if you discover something new and you're already in the build process, I think the Agile cycle is somewhat built already, and that you're able to, like go through that full cycle again and readapt whatever you're building, and hopefully you don't have to start over, of course. But I think that's like the beauty of the Agile cycle in itself, and where you're creating, pretty loose prototypes, and you're able to hopefully adjust left or right when you are throwing those Ys in the road, essentially. So yeah, I've never experienced a total, new persona, but that would be an interesting case to have to deal with.
Yeah, my experience has been sometimes you have a certain amount of expertise on your team, and you go out and nail a couple of great personas and you build around it, and then you realize there's a couple we might have missed. We didn't see them early on, and then we have to go back and kind of find that person and interview them and build around that. So, yeah, I think that's a classic case. I'm also interested in when we have built something, because we talk about the iterative process where we go back and maybe we do phase 2 or phase 3, and there's more generative research that's done that embellishes on what was done at the ground level to build. Can you share any thoughts, either from experience or just your own thinking forward? How do you go about and improve the product after it's in production? Because, we're never done, right?
Right. Yeah. I think that goes back to what Neha was saying about validation. And I wonder if discovery and validation are totally different discovery phases. And maybe those need to be, defined differently in their iterative cycles. And I don't see why you couldn't go back and, of course, we're always hopefully improving what we build. But yeah, I think for me, those are two separate discovery phases and maybe two separate projects, essentially. I'm not sure. What do you think, Neha?
I think I was thinking about how if you have strong synthesis from the first discovery phase, it can be easier to really not go back to the raw documentation, but that's why we have those design tools for synthesis, that we can go back to those already articulated formats and then look at them and see, okay, we just need to tweak this a little bit. Like, I think that the fears of regular Rob have changed after COVID-19, but his motivations are still pretty much the same. He still thinks the city is his, but maybe his fears have changed a little bit. So if we have already well articulated synthesis from the previous cycle, I think it can make the next discovery cycle easier. So I hadn't thought about it like that, Mark. But when you say that, like, there could be an additional discovery at some point because something has changed, I think that's where we are in the world exactly right now, because we have all discovered our users and we know, okay, these are our personas pretty much. And now our personas have done a 360 and we're again, we're in the dark again. So I think this is where we are really switching up our discovery again. But I think relying on the synthesis from the previous discovery can be really helpful to have a little bit of a higher vantage point, I think, or point of departure.
That's a very good answer. I appreciate that. Also thinking about, when you share back to your user what you've built and you get that feedback and they go, no, that wasn't really what I wanted, or what I thought we were going to build. How do you incorporate that? Are there stages like pre-release where part of your QA process is to vet the proposed build with whomever might be interacting with it? Can you talk a little bit about how you bring users in either post-production or pre-production where they can influence what you conceive the right build to be or what a developer perceived?
Well, I think we would all love to have buy-in from our users at as many points as we can, but obviously that's the struggle that not everybody has access to the user, especially when you're on Amazon and your user is just super broad. Who do you even interview then? Anyone? So really, it's more about what you're asking is really about how do you incorporate evaluative research, and I think that's what in the let me get back to the diagram so we can have a visual aid over here. So ideally, what you're saying is that these feedback circles should be from the users, but usually that's not the case. For example, at Children's, what we are actually lucky with some of the projects, they have scheduled a month, 1 hour a month with the stakeholders. So we actually do get buy-in in the middle, but then you have to be ready to share imperfect work. So it's really you have to really juggle that. You have to create these like increments of work which you can share with the users. So yeah, that really steps into evaluative in an ideal world, all these circles would be straight away our user and not internal cycles. But I think usually they are internal cycles. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. My experience is when you introduce those incomplete deliverables to the user, um, before you're done, you actually get great feedback, because a lot of the products that I built in a B2B environment are very technical. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes there's calculations being made and inputs and outputs being delivered for electromechanical equipment. So you need people who really understand how that equipment works. And if you don't vet that through them, then you end up, producing something that doesn't really meet the need of the end user. So your examples were a little different, a little more social, which are great. My experience is not there. That's why I love having you ladies here today, because your perspective is so unique and interesting. I'm really thrilled with the perspective you brought to the topic and the importance of discovery. For those who aren't doing it, you're doing it wrong.
That's not what we're saying.
Oh, no. I think what I'm saying is, if you're doing discovery, you're doing it right. Let me put it in a...
Hey, I have a question. So thank you, first of all, for sharing this. It's been really nice to see these real life examples and how you adapted and which methods you used. So Neha, you mentioned that you're in the past 3 months, we're seeing a lot of changes. I mean, the entire world is changing. So it's good to check back in with the people that you're designing for. I'm curious if you have any examples or if you've got any advice for recruiting in this weird space that we're in right now and trying to, get a hold of people when the entire world is changing. And if you've got any kind of like advice on, ways to recruit users in kind of creative ways.
I think that's it. I feel really bad every time I say something positive about today's world, because I feel like this is a crisis, but there are so many positive things coming out of it. And I think one of it is that the world is pretty much like the world is smaller now, and it's actually so much easier now to get people to speak to you. So I think it's pretty much just about identifying who this user is, and then I think it's easier for the users to be recruited and to participate in these studies, because now they don't really have to put in all the effort of coming into usability lab and testing. So, and I think there are a lot of options for like usertesting.com, a lot of remote testing options. So those kind of really help you with recruitment. And I think what I'm trying to say is that now is a better time than before for recruiting.
Yeah.
Because we're also like saving with remote testing, we're saving so many logistical costs that it's just easier to get people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Are you trying to recruit someone for a study?
So I manage a design team at Paycor in Cincinnati, and we are definitely running into issues recruiting only because we are HR software. So the people we're trying to recruit are usually HR managers or payroll managers who are going through a really tough time right now. And so we're definitely seeing a drop off in the amount of our clients that are willing to talk to us, just because they're so busy with so many things and just managing their businesses. So yeah, we're trying to get creative. I do agree with you though. There is the positive that this is forcing more people to make it work from home or wherever that might be, that they maybe are more familiar with the technology they wouldn't have been before, and we can do more remote work. So yeah.
Maybe now is a good time for something like what Jeff was mentioning, like his meetup is trying to make usability a little bit more, usability testing a little bit more interactive and fun. And like I can share with you later, I conducted a workshop with the children's project. We actually conducted a workshop with the stakeholders. So they didn't really even, I mean, of course, legally they knew they were being tested, but it was presented in the format of, we're kind of just playing with post-its here. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and there are so many, like Jeff said, there's Miro, Mural, there are so many these like online whiteboarding tools, which you can use to have people kind of creatively answer the questions that you need.
Mhm.
I think that's a great space for now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I share Adrian's perspective. I work with the American Marketing Association, and we're trying to get the pulse of professional development needs in the region. And, I think people have more time on their hands in some respects, and yet I think things are so overwhelming. I've tried to get interviews together on people's perspective regarding, what they're doing for professional development. And I think people are very distracted. There are people losing jobs. There are people whose companies are losing revenue. They're losing profitability. I think people are stressed out working from home, trying to raise their kids and make all that happen. So I do see a lot of resistance to people wanting to get on the phone and talk about what their proposed needs are, because everybody's off kilter right now. So it's got to be a very difficult time for, I think, any user experience researcher to get bona fide input from anybody, because we're all off balance. And I think we'll get through this. There'll be a better day where we can seek real input and get bona fide feedback from users and customers. But it's put a lot of pressure on everybody, not just the people in this meeting, but in every regard. So just stay the course, and we'll find that level ground shortly. I think things are opening back up. I thought Memorial Day I saw being celebrated, very vibrantly in the region. I want to thank everybody for being in today's call. Some of you may be on holiday and taking a week, or maybe you're at work and you just joined us after putting in 9 hours at home. I think we all work harder from home than we do in the office in some regard, because there's a certain guilt factor that, we don't want to be slacking. So now I do want to mention one thing we kind of missed at the front end. Is there anyone on the call who is currently looking for work?
I know.
Yeah, I am. Starting August, I am.
Is there anyone on the call who is aware of opportunities or has an opening in their company? Because part of our meetup is to create a network. And I've actually seen a number of people get jobs through the Digital Customer Experience meetup, making connections. And I will say my co-organizer, who is at home with a young baby, Megan Wright, she is at Creative Circle. That's where we've been meeting face to face prior to the virus. And she runs a creative agency in Cincinnati, Creative Circle. And I know, our guests today are in Seattle and in Texas. And I think so this is really cool because we're all over the United States connecting today. But Megan does have opportunities, and Creative Circle is a global organization. So if you don't already know her or have reached out to her, I do suggest that you make a contact and see if there are any either part-time, full-time, contract, freelance opportunities that she might have.
So this is Jessica Dunning. I'm new to this. So I'm not hiring specifically, but I work for Humana Insurance. And I would say we've been very busy over the past couple months because our focus is on Medicare, so they're a vulnerable population. And there's a lot of work going on right now focused on our members. So there might be some different opportunities out on our career site, specifically around design and human-centered design and those types of things. And then I'll just say too that since we're based out of Louisville, Kentucky, I'm in Wisconsin, they've really embraced the work at home approach. So I'm proud to work for Humana, but I'm really proud to work for them now. So there's my plug.
Thank you. We're so happy you were here. And if that's a lifeline for somebody who might be able to enjoy a working opportunity, we're so glad you were here.
You bet.
Well, I want to thank our two co-hosts, Sebra Debrecht and Neha Mann, two outstanding individuals. I met them. I'd known Neha through my meetup, but I met Sebra at the World Information Architecture Day in February. We were so fortunate in many respects because the event got pulled off in February, and little to know, a month later, we were in lockdown. And these two bright, inspiring leaders in this community came forward and said, is there some way we can contribute? Is there something we can do? And I said, I'll have to look at the schedule. And lo and behold, the schedule got turned on its head. And I turned back to them just 10 days ago and said, we need you. Can you come to the front lines and help us to have a meaningful event using your experience and your education? And they're so kind to have stepped up. You know, Sebra's in Texas, Neha's in Seattle. We have this really true global audience here today, and I really appreciate everyone being here and for the great job they did.
I just wanted to, yeah. Sebra, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say thank you, Mark, for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity and everybody who was willing to listen to us. So yeah, thank you again.
Yeah,
Awesome job.
I hope you guys got some value. I learned a lot talking to you.
Same.
Yeah, you added a different perspective, and thanks for giving us the platform to share ours.
Thank you for sharing. You're awesome. Take care. Everybody have a good night. And see